Today, Anton asked me to present to you some of the insights based on our research on experimentation. It's based on the paper by Frans Sengers and Rob Raven. Let me see if I can operate the screen. Yes, so 4 points that I would like to make. I would like to start with embedding of this topic in the broader sustainability transition debate and really give you an overview of how this thinking about experimentation has evolved and specifically focus on this time 98, 2015, where our study is focusing and closing with a few conclusions. So I really like to always show this picture because it shows how our perception of the problems as they were showing up changed also the type of reaction from society and how the academic framing of it has also adjusted. We sort of moved away from this very reactive action of towards the problems as they have been showing up, environmental problems originally, putting the filter on the chimney with use of very end of pipe type of technologies. Then we were recycling, optimizing, closing loops at the industrial side, because in the 70s, 60s, and I'm talking about mostly Western Europe, the perception was, or developed world, the perception of the problem was that this is the industry that is producing the creating the problem, so we have to do something about that. But then we have also realized that in a way, consumption is driving all of this, and we started developing more sustainable products. That's the time of the eco-design, more constructive type of approach. But we are now sort of facing more global societal problems like climate change, loss of biodiversity, and that provides a rationale for a different type of reaction and for different approaches also to look at these problems. So a bit more proactive based on systems of production and consumption. We frame them as socio-technical to emphasize that it's not only the technology, but also the societal aspects. And of course, we cannot leave it up to the government. We cannot leave it up to the market. Actually, every one of us has a job to do. The whole society has to be involved, and we need to know where we want to go. So importance of a sort of a vision. And this picture you also know very well. It's a very stylized view that we have used for a number of years to talk about a radical change of social technical systems, showing the incumbency, the interplay of different forces. I'm pretty sure you're all experts by now about that. What I wanted to emphasize is that we have done a lot of research about the past because we want to understand how these large transformative changes occur and inform the future intervention points. And I think we can identify 5 of such intervention points. One is to stimulate diversity through experimentation. We can also work on supporting these broader fields and institutionalize them. There are also many people who work on destabilization of all these unsustainable regimes and landscape forces, as much as they are very much beyond the immediate reach of all the actors. Still, if we have the knowledge of what's going on in this broader sphere, then we can harness the power of some of these trends for transformative change. And we can also influence in discourses, in creating visions, and through this also influence the directionality of change. So as much as these transition processes are very difficult to steer, to manage, to stimulate, still, I think the picture is hopeful in a sense that there are a number of entry points for different of us. We are operating at different scales, to stimulate those changes. And experimentation plays a very important role. This is where I spent a lot of time researching different aspects. And this picture you probably also know from Smith and Raven originally, showing that how experimentation plays a role in the formation of niches and how different processes, you know, of learning, of expectation formation, how they create broader lessons. These lessons are aggregated, then they are institutionalized, and there is a sort of a circle of that may lead to the development of niches. And I like this picture that was made by a newer publication, Naber, which shows how experimentation by growing can also lead to the process of replication, accumulation, and I would say scale up. I don't know if a transformation is a really good word, but I do like this picture because it shows a sort of a dynamics and the importance of transition experiments. So experiments are very central. They are very often seen as seed beds or seeds of transitions. And at the time when we were doing this review, we have observed that a lot of discussion was paid to discussion of these frameworks, this MLP, TIS, SNM, but the discussion about the concepts such as experiments was a little bit lacking. So that's why we decided that it's a good time to sort of systematize the knowledge about experiments, especially that everyone was coining a different notion of experiment, and sort of figure out or find out what is it that people really mean behind all those different notions. So the research question that has driven this particular study was, how have scholars in the field of sustainability transition conceived of and addressed the concept of the experiment and its role? So really the aim was to systematize and identify opportunities for further research. Now, in this work, we have deployed a systematic literature review, and four very important elements of it is that it has to be comprehensive in its coverage of literature. So we had to ensure that we have identified all necessary publications. There has to be quality of the included evidence. Yeah, in our field, in academic world, in transition studies, we sort of look at peer-reviewed international publications. Third point, clear and systematic approach to synthesis of data. This you can do in two ways, either top-down, find a framework, or two and three, and combine them depending on your research question, or you can do it in a more bottom-up way. That was the way how we proceeded. And then follow transparent and rigorous process. So when you write a paper and you write your method section and you want to publish it, it's really very important that anyone who reads it is able to reproduce the knowledge and come with more or less similar results. Interpretation, of course, is the other story, but at least it comes up with the same sample. So with regards to the number 1 and 2, we have done quite a comprehensive study. So on the left side, at that time, the steering group of STRN has produced a peer-reviewed publication list. We really wanted to have an overview of all the important pieces that have been produced in our field. It was about 643. And we use this as a source of information about important papers on experiments, 67 altogether. Then, on the other hand, we have also done a very decent scopus analysis, which was combined with a sort of insights from two papers, at that time very recent, which were mapped. They tried to map the contours of the sustainability transition research. From that exercise, we got 40 positions. Then, because there were also a number of papers presented at conferences, IST conferences. We also looked there because many papers are being presented and also relevant and good, but not published yet. So we also looked at that as a source. And yeah, given our standing in the field and history, we devised sort of our expertise to handpick all the other papers that did not show up in any of those reviews, but we knew that they were really very important. Additionally, we verified the, the whole stuff at 2 meetings and with other experts. So I hope it's a very decent approach. And if you do this, if you did it, then I would hope that you came with the same sort of sample of 120 pieces. For the systematic analysis, we did it in a very much bottom-up way. We observed that many of the articles talk about normative orientation. So what are these experiments for? Why are they set up? They also build not only on transition studies, but they link to other fields. So that's what's meant under theoretical foundation. Analytical emphasis, many of them have developed own sort of frameworks to analyze these experiments. Key actors were mentioned very often. And every of those pieces have had a sort of name of an experiment, conceptualization, if you like. So that's the theoretical part. On empirical, many of the papers were theoretical, conceptual, but many also gave empirical examples. And then we looked at which empirical domain is the experiment relevant for. Is there any mention of the geographical location? It could be country or a city. But increasingly, because this was the time when we were interested in urban experimentation, this urban focus has been really growing. And we decided to also make this chronological citation network analysis. For the theoretical foundations, except for the sustainability transitions, which is quite a transdisciplinary and a collective discipline, we identified things like evolutionary economics, constructive technology assessment, sociology of expectation. So this is what was meant by the theoretical foundations. So for the transparent and rigorous process, we have set up the database and we have mapped all these articles and came up with the following beautiful picture. I'm really proud of it because it was a lot of work. And what you can see is the citation network as well as the size of the citation. So Kemp et al. And Hoogma et al. Down with the blue dots shows that these are the most cited pieces. Also, the time is going from down up. So the further we were in the field, the more publications there were, and there was also a greater diversity of different conceptualizations of experiments. Yeah, this is same picture, but also the links are colored, so then it's also more visible that this Kemp and Hoogma really provided a foundations, but in different colors you can see different conceptualization of these experiments. And before I discuss each one of them, I think I want to mention that we saw two sort of lines of thought. One was very techno-managerial approach to the experiments, and the other one social, civic, bottom-up type of experimentation. At that time, there were other more exotic definitions, such as living labs, policy experiments, governance experiments, but they were not really that much developed. Now the situation is changing, so I think if there's anyone interested, you can do another batch of analysis and see where we've gone with this research on experiments. There were also sort of one-of-a-kind type of definitions, such as real-life experiments or degrowth experiments, but with time, they did not got picked up by others, and the authors who proposed them, they also didn't continue. But generally, authors, if someone started with specific conceptualization, that author has continued with that. And in that context, we identified 6. I added 7th because it was also, it's a type of an experiment which I have been working on, but in the paper you can read about these 6. So niche experiments, bounded socio-technical experiments, transition experiments, grassroots experiments, urban climate change experiments, sustainability experiments, and transnational experiments. So it's a lot of different experiments. On the one hand, they are all different, but they also share some commonalities. So this is not to read for you, but I will share my slides so then you can have it for yourself. The first, the Skemp and Hoogma publications, they really very strongly linked with early ideas behind strategic niche management. And this strategic niche management was very much focused on thinking about how some of the technologies that are got stuck in a lab can be accepted by society and diffused in a society in a much broader way. So this niche experiment was very strongly linked with strategic niche management, but because MLP and SNM built on other disciplinary thoughts like evolutionary economics, STS, constructive technology assessment, sociology, history of technology, very many, then these theoretical foundations have really influenced the way how this niche experiment has been defined. The actors that have been very often mentioned on occasion of discussing niche were regime actors. I think van der Poel was the one who coined this notion of regime outsiders. I think our thinking now changed a little bit. We also know that these are the incumbent actors that can also engage in experimentation. But at that time, it was really this very strong focus on making a distinction between niche and regime actors. And Rob Raven, if you know him, and probably you do because he's very active in this field. He wrote his PhD about niche experimentation. And for example, these biogas experiments in Denmark, he looked at those initiatives as from a perspective of strategic niche management. Now, so this is this niche experiment is this blue field, and you can see that it started long ago and it is doing well still. It's a very important part of the research, and also many people really go back to Hoogma and Kemp, and I really like when we are citing the original sources, because it happens very often that people repeat others. Sometimes they cite them or not, but then this original creator of this idea is lost. But in the case of these niche experiments, this was not the case. Now, the second line, this is this red one. So you can see Verheul and Vergraagd on the bottom. Oh, I'm sorry. This is this red dots a little bit to the left on your screen. It's mainly Philip Vergraagd and Halina Brown, who really thought that this niche experimentation is too much technologically focused. The whole discussion is too much about green technologies. So by creating this notion of bounded socio-technical experiments, they really wanted to emphasize this social aspect of experimentation. They also emphasize that these experiments are bounded in space and time. They really emphasize the creators are really societal actors, and that there is a lot of learning, and that this type of experiments are really set up in a conscious way in order to try things out and try different strategies. So experiments in all these writings about bounded socio-technical experiments are really oriented towards social learning. Still, S&M was very important because at that time we still didn't have MLP. S&M was developed first, and we thought of the MLP. But there were strong links to the social learning theory and learning processes. An example, all these societal experiments like zero fossil fuel residential buildings in Boston. Then I think the next one is the, let me see, transition experiments, so the yellow one. I don't know if you recognize, but this is the Rotterdam school. That's where Dirk Lorbach is, where Jan Rothmans, Niki Franciszkaki was there, Julia Wittmeier, Flor Avellino. So these people were have coined the notion of transition experiment, really consciously set in order to progress with sustainability transitions. Because transition management was thought of at that time, it was developed based on, among others, ideas from complex system theory. There are many links to the complex system theory, and transition experiment has been coined as an instrument of transition management. So really consciously thinking about how can we stimulate transitions, and transition experiment was the way to go about that. Susanne van den Bosch, she wrote her PhD on experimentation, transition experimentation, and she came up with this framework of deepening, broadening, and scaling up. It's about learning processes, and deepening is really going into the details of what can we learn from the experiments. Broadening is about learning between experiments, and scaling up or learning about the regime is about, yeah, how can we move beyond the experimental forms. And very often when you read this literature, you can see the front runners being mentioned. So really people who are consciously setting these experiments up. They also developed methodology for transitioning non-transition experiments. I don't know if it was, it was used at the beginning quite some time, for some time, but I didn't see much of it coming back any longer. And at that time, this was a very Dutch program. So we had a very particular transition experiment in healthcare in the Netherlands, and drift people were involved in it. And then I think I have the grassroots experiment. So then we have the UK people, Adriaan Smith, Jill Seyfang, continuing with their work on grassroots innovation. Through grassroots innovations, they really wanted to emphasize this emergent movement from the society, very ideologically driven, people who wanted to do something for sustainable development, but very strongly driven also by the community motivations, and also a very strong focus on not only green technologies, but foremostly social innovation. So normative orientation in grassroots experiments, inclusive green niche development for transformation, theoretical foundations except for transition studies, also social movement theory, really geared towards looking at how are we doing? Are we really moving on? So indicators, are we moving on along sustainability? So sustainability indicators were very often used. Key actors, civil society. An example of a grassroots experiment is the Transition Town movement by Rob Hopkins. And then the last one, no, two more. This group here, it was, I told you that at around 2012, 13, the urban context became an interesting locus for experimentation. We had a lot of discussion whether city can be considered a niche. Originally, there was a lot of attention to this type of framing, but with time we became a little bit more critical. Jonas Torrens and Johan Schott did some work on that. You can take a look at those publications, but Bulkley, Castan Broto are the names connected with urban climate change experiments. They really wanted to emphasize this practical context. If it's practical, therefore, it's also very uncertain because you don't know how things will develop. Very often these experiments, urban climate change experiments, are set up in order to experiment with new forms of governance and trying new ways of organizing city. It was also the time that we were sort of changing our thinking away from top-down planning of cities towards more experimental based. So this was the gist behind definition of these urban climate change experiments. Yeah, links to the urban governance, a lot of attention to urban non-state private actors, NGOs. London congestion charge probably is a good example of it. And then the last one that I have been involved in, which is a sustainability experiment, a planned initiative that embodies a highly novel socio-technical configuration likely to lead to substantial environmental sustainability gains. We have made this definition based on discussion with a number of people in Asia in different countries with different groups. It was done in the context of discussing environmental convergence. The whole point of it is that at that time, it was expected that if countries in developing world follow the path of the developed countries in terms of development, but also in terms of environmental footprint, then we will have a problem. So how can we avoid this type of convergence in those countries? And what role do experiments play in it? So in that work, we have connected a lot with the geography studies and also development studies. And one important notion in the discussion of this experimentation were transnational linkages, so ways through which people make connections with other contexts and draw on the knowledge, on technology, on other assets in order to complement the missing resources locally. So a lot of attention on local actors. And I put also some explanation of these transnational linkages. I'm not going to go through it, but just for you to take a look that, you have to imagine that, yeah, if people move around, I forgot to put a nice picture. When I was in Chiang Mai and we were doing this work, I met a person, a Thai person, who got himself a little folded Gazelle bike. Gazelle is the mark of the bike, and he brought it to Thailand. But in Thailand, I don't know if there are any people from Thailand. You cannot bike, at least not too much. There is nowhere to bike. It's very hot and also not safe. But what he has done, he started a Sunday biking club, which is a very nice example of experimentation driven by these transnational linkages, because he traveled a lot. He learned how people do these things, and he started something of a totally different nature. He didn't force people to use bikes to go to work like we do in the Netherlands. Yeah, he just something that worked for that people, and he continued this Sunday biking club. So through all these transnational linkages, you can sort of explain all these different flows of technology, finance, but also people and knowledge. And this is, in a way, a very nice confirmation that these convergence theories are probably not working all the time, that it's not true that innovations occur in the West and are being transported to the rest of the world, especially to the global South. It's not true that there is a huge technological dependence of those countries on developed world. So transnational connectivity, these transnational linkages in these experiments were very nice proof or first proof of this different dynamics, totally different, qualitatively different type of development. Would be nice if this line of research is sort of moved ahead. This is an example. We have done quite a lot of work on these transnational linkages. These are different projects than the donor type of oriented activities, different than the World Bank type of activities. We made a big database of, we worked in India and in Thailand in energy and mobility, and we looked at these transnational linkages, and from that we identified areas of increased experimentation. So what is it that people experiment with, and how these transnational linkages play out? And here you have some examples, just pictures, just to show you that there is a lot happening, like this walking and cycling, not really for utilitarian trips, but for fun, for enjoying it as a sport on a Sunday afternoon. What these transnational linkages were useful for was to realize that it's not so much the technology that is being transferred, it's not so much the money that is being sent from place to place, but it's people and their knowledge sharing that really is behind the success or failure of specific experiments. And then, therefore, we went a little bit more into the details, and we looked at all the different experimentation, and we tried to see, we played with different data, and we tried to see to what extent the origin of the initiator plays a role. And we found out that it was a very important indicator. So if you are from India, or from Thailand, like that person traveling somewhere, learning about big world and what other people are doing, come back, you have the sort of inside knowledge about what could work, and therefore these type of experimentation have a much higher chance of survival than those that are being imposed by, for example, these big international organizations like a World Bank or ADB. You know, they set up some sort of a capacity building because they realize this is important, that people are ready, but sometimes they just set up experiments that as soon as the money is gone, they just die out. And if you set it up with these are the people who set it up, then these experiments really have a greater chance for success. So that's based on that, we have sort of coined the notion of transnational experimentation, which is different than technology transfer type of experiments or really purely indigenous experiments which do not make use of these transnational linkages in any way. So based on all these different categorizations, we came to a sort of, I don't want to say definition, because defining things is never good. There's always a chance that someone will come and make a better definition, but a sort of qualifiers of what we could consider as an experiment in sustainability transition field. So based on all the different factors that people mentioned, the ones that I mentioned before, inclusivity is very important, practice-based, challenge-led, system innovation, social learning, uncertainty, and ambiguity. And I included an explanation of all these. Inclusive means that there is quite a broad network of people involved, that the network is mature, it's well balanced, there is a good democratic participation. Challenge-led is about agreement about that we want to contribute to something bigger. Practice-based is a very important element because it makes these type of experiments different from lab experiments, or even early work on policy experiment has also been very much done in the old way. So having a control sample and then you compare how the intervention works or not. Here, you don't have it. You just start things out there in society, in real life. And that's how these experiments differ from lab experiments or natural sciences experiments. And then because you set it up in reality, then you never know how this will come out. So there has to be preparedness, if I say it well, for the fact that it can fail. And so there is a huge level of uncertainty, and funding agencies or whoever provides whatever type of protection, they have to realize that. And also a lot of social learning. And to give you an example from what I'm doing now, and Laura is with us, she's also working on this project on the community-based virtual power plant. It's a sort of a community initiative which allows people to not only consume and produce energy, but also participate in the energy management. So basically trade it, participate in the market. We managed to get a very nice project to try this experiment, to set it up actually. So we were very privileged that we didn't have to study other people's experiments, but we could set one ourselves. And we set it up following all these prescriptions that we have made before in our papers in a very inclusive way. So we included different types of actors with different interests. Challenge-led, we really wanted to see to what extent this type of experimentation can bring about more radical CO2 reductions and also democratization of the energy system. Practice-based, we set 3 pilots in 3 countries. Okay, Anton, good. We worked with real people. It's not, we worked with people in villages, in cities. It was very nice that Interreg Northwest Europe wanted to fund this project, so it helped us deal with uncertainty. So of course we have to deliver everything, but imagine if we fail, this will also be an outcome. So there was we were happy that we could experiment and see what type of configuration works. And there was also a lot of social learning. So we deployed a method of action research, which means that we researchers work together with practice people on commonly defining the problem and then how we go about solution and conceptualizing everything. So it was really, truly transdisciplinary project. It still is, it's still going on. So in terms of trends, when you look at all this research on experimentation, there is, of course, way more happening now in the literature than what I have presented up until 2015. We could observe some sort of shift from moving away from state-driven type of experimentation towards more decentralized forms. Also a lot of shift from only looking at the developed countries to more global south, from national context to urban context, and also a very important one, moving away from single case studies, although they are still very important, towards more bigger samples in order to identify broader patterns. A couple of conclusions. All these conceptualizations are all about the same. It's about stimulating transitions, but they sort of look at things from a little bit different perspective. One is about initiating change, the other one is about providing direction, the third one is about supporting ongoing dynamics. So that's what we do as researchers, but this, systematic going through it sort of made us realize that, yeah, we just talk all about the same. So it doesn't matter how you really call it. It's about really trying things out for the sake of stimulating transition. Another point I want to mention is that just like very often we think about transitions in a positive way. It's great, we need it. Yes, we need to dismantle the unsustainable incumbency, but we don't think about the losers who are affected by the whole process of change. And it's exactly the same with experimentation. So we have to be also very cautious when we talk about these things. And also, there are new questions that emerge from all that research, namely that, yeah, how do we have to protect these experiments? Because experiments are highly protected financially, geographically, or socio-cognitively, institutionally, in various ways. How long do we have to keep this protection? When to withdraw it? When are the experiments ready? Then when you set up real experiments, do you just set it up, or are you first getting engaged in the alignment of expectations with people? What do we want to do? And therefore how the experiment should look like. Then the very important issue of, are we striving immediately for consensus, or do we allow space also for some disagreements? And actually this is very important. Conflict plays an important role in not only experimentation, it's when we articulate what we think about not only technology, but in general about life, and that's through this articulation some alignment may occur. And then the choice between relying on the more market policy approach, or should we stimulate more of the bottom-up civic type of experiments? Maybe you have opinion. I would hope that some of you at least work on these aspects. And yeah, in terms of new research, I think what has not been done terribly much is really understanding these power plays in experimentation. This is a very nice field to engage with. Also going further with geography of experimentation, how these little experiments create a more global niche, and not only global in terms of geographics, but geography, but also in terms of the structuration level. I think there's also a lot of work now on incumbents. So that's very nice. This was one of our recommendations at that time. Incumbents also experiment a lot for various purposes. Like Shell, for example, tries to stay in business. I don't know if they are very much interested in doing something good for the planet. And yeah, going beyond specific case studies, but understanding broader patterns. I think last point that I want to say is that I think replication and upscaling, even though there are a number of papers, I have not seen anything substantial on replication and upscaling. So I would be curious also to hear from you, and yeah, maybe I look forward to your contributions. Thank you very much.